I've been told there's a little bit of a delay in starting classes, so I'm going to fill in the first minute by talking slowly about the class. So that way when people finally do join in, you won't see me jumping right into the actual halachos themselves. So today's class is going to be Mishna Berurah, Siman 48, and we're going to go through 48, 49, and 50 today because these next couple are short but interesting, and so we'll wait another 30 seconds before diving right in. As always, you can follow along in Safaria. If you want to continue to use that, it's a wonderful resource. So now we're going to start with Siman 48, which is more about the morning blessings. We're talking specifically here about the recitation of the section of the Torah that deals with the continual offering. It is known as the Tamid. And we're going to talk about how you also recite some of the same types of sacrifices offered when it's on Shabbos and not just during the week. Okay? So unlike most sections of Shulchan Aruch, this one starts off with the Ramah having the first word. Usually he has the second word or he has the rebuttal. But here he talks about the custom itself. He says the custom is to recite the section in the Torah dealing with the Korban Tamid itself, and you'll find that section in your Siddur under the section known as Korbanos or offerings. In the Article Siddur, it shows up around page 26 or so, and it goes on for quite a few pages, and it doesn't start with the offering itself. So he says the custom is to recite the just that parsha itself. Olas Tamid Ha'asiyah B'Har Sinai. The actual Korban Tamid that itself was offered on Sinai. He says furthermore the custom is to also talk about the arrangements of the arrangements made upon the altar. I was about to say the arrangements of the altar. The altar wasn't really arranged. It's how the things were arranged around the altar, and how they brought the wood up to the altar in order to make the fire burn more. And there's also these little paragraphs that start with Ribon HaOlamim, talking about how it's a small paragraph talks about you commanded us to bring these things and now allow the statements of our mouth to fulfill the obligation. And the idea is that these recitations are fulfilling or in place of, but not fulfilling the mitzvah, but are in place of the actual process of bringing the korban forward. The continual mention of them will be considered as if you brought it. We don't get credit for the mitzvah. You have to actually do the mitzvah to get mitzvah credit. However, it will be considered as if you would want to do it because you are continuing to make mention of it. Okay? You can say it, it's better to say it with the community, but you can also say it by yourself. And some people say that this part, the Tamid itself, that portion that talks about the Tamid ben Harbayim, the Tamid Shachar, to me, the morning continual sacrifice, should be said with the congregation. And if you said it at home, then you should repeat it with the tzibur. And the idea is that eventually you're going to recite the Kaddish D'Rabbanan afterwards as well. So the Shulchan Aruch begins. He says on Shabbos you say next to the Parshas HaTamid you say the extra lines referring to the Musaf, the additional service next to the regular offering. But you don't need to do that on Rosh Chodesh and Yom Tov itself because you're going to recite these same verses in Musaf. Okay, so you don't need to do that. But on Shabbos you should. And the Ramah says that our custom actually to do that because we want to make sure that everybody knows it is Rosh Chodesh, and so therefore we do that. What we also do is that a lot of people they kind of shake and stand while they're reading from the Torah, He uses a little word for that to say that people should be in awe of the reading itself, like the day that it was given. And also, you also want to shake a little bit as you pray, or tremble a little bit. So we call that in Yiddish the shuckling. So it's kind of this back and forth, or this to the side, or the twisting. So we say that adds to the prayer service. So that is the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah talking about our customs. So that's 48. Let's talk about some of the interesting laws over here. Okay, so what we mentioned is that there's now an idea, a good idea, to replace the actual service in the temple, the service in the Beis HaMikdash, by reciting the lines that are pertinent to that mitzvah. So we can't bring the korban. However, we should still make the order and recite the order. So someone who knows how to recite these things should continue to say it. And the Mishnah Berurah even adds that you should add as many things from the service itself as you possibly can. You should add the recitation. You should recite the section that is pertinent to the offering of the incenses, for example. And some people even add on sections of building the altar itself, the mizbeach itself, because there's the main mizbeach, the main altar in the center of the temple courtyard, and then there's the inside of the heichal, inside of the area around the Holy of Holies. I forget the name, the English name for the heichal. But that area, which is in the main enclosure, the temple itself was open. The courtyard was all open. Thank you for the reminder to like and subscribe and share. Appreciate that. And so there's even a further custom to also recite other sections of sacrifices that you should recite it. The custom over here that you should recite this parsha of the Talmud, you should do it standing, but a lot of people don't agree with that. Okay, unless you're going to be public with it, doing publicly, and maybe even reading it from a cloth. So we'll have a custom to read it from an actual piece of parchment, where it's written on there, and then there might be a stronger reason to do that. But we don't necessarily have the person leading the davening say it, like we mentioned earlier about somebody gets up in front and says all the Birkos HaShachar, and also says sittis in front of the whole community. But you should still make mention that the recitation of these lines and these verses is to fill the void created by a lack of the Beis HaMikdash. Okay, and that is that custom. All right, so that's the main thing. Okay, so let's see. Did I miss anything over here? Some people say not to do the shaking, not to the moving, but I guess still do it anyway. It wasn't so simple. Okay, let's take a look. Let's go to 49 now. So I hope everyone enjoyed learning about the parsha of the Talmud. Okay, this is a simple halacha. It's the halacha is that you may recite Kriya Shema without looking into a written work. So the halacha is that when you are reciting verses from the Torah, you shouldn't recite them by heart. You should look into a book to recite them. Now, even though that's the case, something that is commonly recited, or it's something that you're familiar with, you can recite it, what's known as Baal Peh, which is by heart. Baal Peh literally means someone who has mastered the mouth. So someone who can say it without needing recourse to the written text itself. And so, what are those things? Kriya Shema, reciting the Shema itself and the paragraph following it. The blessings from the Kohanim, Birkas Kohanim. What we just mentioned about the Talmud, that if you say it every day, it becomes something that you're used to saying, and you continue saying it. And other things like that is permitted. Okay, so even though there is a general rule not to do that, that is okay. So the Mishnah Berurah points out that someone who is blind can recite things Baal Peh, and also if someone is trapped in prison and he can't get a chumash or anything like that, he should do that there. What's interesting is that you don't have to necessarily have the scroll. There's certain times when you're required to have a scroll, or you can have a printed book. So if you see, like behind me, printed books, right? So I have over here. Over here is a Tanakh. So what we're talking about is you take your Tanakh and you would open it and you would read the verses from the book. The idea is to not mess them up and to not get them wrong. But if you have a properly edited, printed Tanakh, and it's not in a scroll, that's what it means. Okay? So, however, some people feel that it needs to be written on a cloth, as I mentioned. So, there is a discussion over here that, let's say, what happens if the person is reciting it? Can you recite it along with the person leading the davening? So, for example, the Parsha of the Talmud that we just mentioned, which is a section from the Torah, when we just mentioned that some people used to recite it publicly, so are you supposed to sit there and listen to it, or do you recite it word by word along with them? Okay, so the problem is that seems to be a little bit of that, to say them like that without having them in a cloth. So some people, like the Berurah, say no, you should really have it written down, and even written down on a proper cloth so that it has a proper fulfillment of writing. So the printing press for some people was insufficient and it needed to be written, even if it's just written in pieces, should be written like that. But we're not going to get too far off topic to discuss that. It's kind of cool and interesting, and so, for example, the most obvious example of this is that we read the Haftarah on Shabbos mornings from a printed book. Some people say, well, you should just read it where it's printed at the end of another chumash. You should buy a whole Tanakh and read it out of there. And even further, some people say, no, you should have to buy all the scrolls of the Nevi'im that we read. And same thing too with all the Megillos that we read. We read so much of Tanakh that you should invest the money to get the actual thing. So at some other point we'll come back to that, talk about that some more. But just know that it is common. So the only time when you're allowed to recite things Baal Peh, for example, is if you're giving a drasha, and to go and open up the exact spot, it would be a real annoyance to stop everything and look something back up again. That if it's something that you're familiar with, that you're allowed to go ahead and look it up if you know that you'll be keeping the people waiting there for you. Okay, so those things too. And others, so we mentioned Kriya Shema, Psuki Zimra, all the Tehillim that are in there, you can recite that as well. Okay, and so that is, that those are certain things that can be recited Baal Peh. Other examples are anything in the book of Tehillim that you're familiar with if you recite the book of Tehillim regularly. So because people use it like prayer, and other verses that are used as prayer, that's fine. But most people say that you should not use it. You should not be reciting it by heart, especially if you're leading davening, if you're the Shliach Tzibor. Okay, so you should really be reading it from somewhere else. Okay, that is 49. Now let's do 50 over here. Maybe even get to 51. Okay. So now we're going to discuss, at the end of reciting all of these things, there is this section called Ezehu Makoman. So at the very end of davening, before we recite Kaddish and the Sidurim, you will find that there is this paragraph, this chapter of Mishna there called Ezehu Makoman Shel Zavachim. So this is a very interesting chapter because there is not one Mishnah cited in this chapter that has any dispute in it whatsoever. There's not one dispute recorded in the entire chapter. Most chapters are, the Chachamim hold like this, and Rabbi so-and-so says like that. The rabbi said like this, and Rabbi so-and-so disagrees, and there's a third rabbi who says something in between the other two guys. So, or three rabbis all disagree. But in this whole chapter, it's not there. Okay, and what's interesting is that it's meant to be recited almost as a prayer service. So some people have permitted it to be recited in the home of someone who's in mourning. Normally, you're not allowed to learn Torah in someone's house who's in mourning, unless you're doing it to recall some aspect of mourning. So, for example, to recall the soul of the departed, we recite 4 Mishnas that start with the letters Nun, Shin, Mem, and Hey for Neshama. but we don't. We kind of consider this to be learning Torah, okay? Which also means that Birchas Torah should be recited before reciting this, okay? So we say Eze Makoma. We also have another thing which is called the Bryce of Rabbi Yishmael. The Bryce of Rabbi Yishmael are the 13 laws regarding how to extract law from verses. So you're not really allowed to just invent these things. You should have some type of oral tradition explaining that one of these rules was applied to the Torah to extract a law from it, and you probably have an ancient tradition that this was done. But you should be familiar with what those laws were, because this way you'll know and understand that these laws are a little bit different than the actual verbiage of the verse. So when you compare different verses to each other and they use similar language, you can learn the law of one to the other one. That's a principle being described in this Bryce of Rabbi Yishmael, but you shouldn't be making that up on your own. And so the reason why we're putting this here in the morning is so that way everyone should have a little bit of learning every day. You're going to learn a little bit of Torah, like we talked about this with Berurah Torah. You should have a little bit of learning something from the Torah, a little bit of Mishnah, and a little bit of Talmud. And this Brisa is really like Gemara, because it's telling you how Gemara works. Okay, so that's the whole point of that one. So you really need to recite Berurah Torah before reciting this. And let's see. Let's see. You should really know what. You should also make sure you know what it says, and you should read the translation if you don't understand what you're reading. So that's not called learning if you don't understand it. So if you read through it, you also, if you don't know what it means, you should read the translation as well, so that becomes considered learning. Otherwise, it's not. And you should always try to say it with a little bit of a tune. This comes from the Sefer Shnei Luchos Abri, so that way it kind of feels like you're learning. So there's people who have a tune they use for learning, that would be acceptable for this as well. We have some time over here, so let's see if we can get to 51. I'll just change the subject heading over this. So I thought there was more Mishna Berurah on this than there actually is. So let's see if we can get through a bunch of laws here in 51. Okay, so we're going to talk about the Baruch Shamar through Yishtabach. That's what the name of this section is, called Psukei de Zimra. So the Anshe Knesset Zagadola, the men of the Great Assembly, who arrived in the time after Ezra, they basically said that they were standing around somewhere, and they received this little letter that fell out of heaven, and it had 87 words on it. And this is where it became the beginning of Psukei de Zimra, is to write this prayer of Baruch Shamar. So because of the fact that an actual prayer was handed to them that talks about praise, so therefore they established it. Now the joke is that there's 87, which in Gematria are letters Pei and Zion, which is also short for Psukei Zimra. Okay, so it all sort of floats very nicely together, and therefore it was established to have 87 words in Psukei de Zimra. And that's why we have it at the beginning. And there's also a custom to hold two tzitzis in front of you to remind you that you have the mitzvah. They're surrounded by mitzvahs by reciting Baruch Shamar. So just like you're surrounded in mitzvahs with tzitzis, you're surrounding yourself with a blessing of praise. So you are going to recite all of those things together. And you should try to finish Baruch Shamar before the Chazan, so that way you can say Amen. But if you don't, you shouldn't say Amen if you're in the middle of it. Okay? And because you want to say Baruch Shamar because it is a blessing. So can you say Amen in the middle of Baruch Shamar? So you're allowed to, just not for itself. So if you got there late and they're up to Yishtabach and you were for some reason way back in Psukei de Zimra, right? Or you're there early for the next minyan, you could say Amen to another blessing, even though you're in the middle of a bracha. Okay. However, you shouldn't say it after you say the words Baruch Atah Hashem, because then you might mess yourself up and mess up the bracha. Yeah, let's say you finish at the same time as the Chazan. We hold that you shouldn't say Amen, because one who says Amen to their own bracha is not appropriate. So if you finish at the same time as somebody else, don't say Amen to the bracha. Which is also, we'll see later on, is when we say Birchos Kriya Shema, is when you want to recite the bracha before Shema with the Chazan, so you don't say Amen afterwards. Okay, so if you finish your bracha at the same time as the Shliach Tzibur, person leading it, don't recite Amen. You try to finish a couple of steps ahead. So that's okay. However, if you hear somebody else's bracha a little bit later, you could respond Amen to that. Okay, and so too if it's a different bracha that they're reciting. Okay, and it's not to say Amen is not a break, because Psukei Zimra is a number of prayers and praises, but you're not allowed to go ahead and talk once you recite the Baruch Shamar. So you should therefore not speak, and you also shouldn't wait a long time in between each paragraph or in the middle of paragraphs either, because it is considered one long blessing. If you do have to go use the restroom in the middle, you could recite Asher Yatzer Bracha. So after Yishtabach, you can say Amen after your own bracha, but we're going to discuss later on that is we don't recite Amen when you finish with the Shliach Tzibur. So that's a difference of opinion between the Shulchan Aruch and Ashkenazic practice. Okay, so we continue on. That you should not, once you start Baruch Shamar, you should not be talking at all until you finish Shemona Esrei. And that's even if it's for a mitzvah purpose, okay? Because it's just one long bracha, you're interrupting. So if you did interrupt, we're saying that it's true on the same level as Birchos Kriya Shema, basically. So some people used to have a custom bringing a chassan in during that time period. And also was another custom to switch the shliach tzibur for a bris milah in the middle of Psukei Zimra. So the way they did that is basically you would stop in the middle of a section, and then the section that in Psukei Zimra talks about that God made a bris, a covenant with Abraham, that whoever is the father of the child would step in Psukei Zimra. So to let people know that there was going to be a bris that day without making a break in the middle of davening. That custom is only found in certain sidurim that come from northern Germany, but that custom did not stick around. However, the silly little break in the middle of the Psukei Zimra is still there, so you can find it in even a classic article siddur where they don't make mention of the custom at all, but they kept the break. Okay, we just said that you shouldn't be talking after Shemona Esrei, and really you can't speak until after you do Tachanun as well. But and that's even for the Var Mitzvah, you shouldn't take a break. Let's see over here. Okay. However, there are certain exceptions. So we said you can respond. So if a very honorable person interrupts you in the middle of Psukei Zimra, you could respond to them. And so, right, some people do circulate tzedakah during Psukei Zimra. I think we'll get to that in a minute. So, and they basically say the rules are the same as for Kriya Shema. So the Mishnah Berurah over here has a really long section explaining this law in great detail. But for the most part, if someone said hello to you, like I said, good Shabbos or whatever, and you finish your section of Tehillim, that paragraph, like you started Ashrei and you get to the end of Ashrei in Psukei Zimra, and someone goes up to you and says Shabbos, you could turn to them and say good Shabbos, and then continue on. But you couldn't say good Shabbos to them; they would have to say it to you. And so the Mishnah has a really long thing over here about different places where you can take a break. I'll have to, what I'll do is I'll find later. I have a chart for when you can take these breaks. Okay. So in the first section of Psukei Zimra, there's a break right after in those long paragraphs, there are some breaks. It says that you should take a break between Hashem Elohim và Hashem Shemaim Asa. There's a straight line that is drawn there, or it says take a short break. So that's what this halacha is. That explains that custom to print that in the Siddur. So when you're reciting Ashrei, you should have in mind that when you say that he opens up his hands to everyone, that you should have in mind that that's what it means. Okay, and there's other things in Psukim Zimra over here that are all printed in the Siddur that are mentioned here in the Ramah. I'm not going to go into them in great detail. And he does mention over here that the standing parts, we stand for Baruch Shamar and Vayivarech David. However, the Vilna Gaon did not stand for that. The custom also of the Ari is to give out tzedakah when you get to the last paragraph of it. Someone just mentioned about that, so that's the minhag of the Ari, was to collect tzedakah at that time. Okay, I can show you all these different. There's a whole list in here. It's there's plenty of English to describe it. I'll send you a link of the different breaks in the chat. If you haven't signed up for the WhatsApp chat for us, just go ahead and stop that. We're almost done here, as we're going to wrap it up. One should slow down their davening, to not say them hurriedly, but at a pleasant pace. Mr. Berurah says that you should say them as if you were going to count something one by one, like counting money, like 1, 2, 3, 4. Don't swallow them, and recite each word clearly. So he says if it's really cold in shul, you're probably davening at home, this part. Okay, and there is a one final psalm over here, Mishna L'Soda, which is recited after the first section, and it is the praise of thanksgiving. So it's right after that first long paragraph after Baruch Shamar. And so this one should always be said, and it should be said with an actual tune according to Shulchan Aruch, because it's one of those songs that will stay around forever. However, on Pesach and Shabbos and Yom Tov, when we didn't bring the offering connected with the song, you don't recite this paragraph. And he says, look later on, we talk about the day before Yom Kippur as well, and that's what we do. We skip it on those days. My Mishnah Berurah disappeared over here. Let me see if I can get it back. Okay, and let's see. That's our custom. And with that, we will finish up to 51. Okay. All right. So we got all the way through 51 today. Okay. So good work, everybody. Thank you, everyone, for coming out. And we will pick up with Ahavas Chesed on Thursday, same bat time, same bat channel. Thank you, everyone, for coming out today. And I will keep you updated about the time that I can find for a Parsha class. So thank you for coming out. Invite your friends, invite your family, and have a wonderful day. Take care.